All right, we're going to finish our discussion of African Americans in the Gilded Age by looking at African Americans in the 1920s, specifically at three topics. One, the rise of black nationalism. Two, the reemergence of the KKK. And something called the Harlem Renaissance. The more than 400,000 blacks who served in the armed forces believed that a victory for democracy abroad would help them achieve democracy for themselves at home. At first, in spite of discrimination they encountered in the military, they maintained their conviction that they would be treated as full-fledged citizens upon their return. Many began to talk about the birth of something called the new Negro, a new image of a black man who was independent and proud. Thousands joined the NAACP at the forefront of the fight for racial equality. By 1918, 100,000 African Americans subscribed to the NAACP's magazine, The Crisis, whose editor, W.B. Du Bois himself, had urged them to support the war. This wartime optimism made the post-war discrimination and hatred that blacks encountered very hard to endure. Many black workers who had found jobs in the North were fired to make way for returning white veterans. Returning black servicemen, meanwhile, had to scrounge for poorly paid jobs as unskilled laborers. In the South, lynch mobs targeted black veterans, who now refused to tolerate the usual insults and indignities. 10 of the 70 blacks lynched in the South in 1919 were veterans. The worst anti-black violence that year, 1919, occurred in the North, however. Crowded conditions during the war had forced black and white ethnic city dwellers into an uncomfortably close proximity. Racial tensions escalated to full-scale race riots. The deadliest such occurred in Chicago in July of 1919 when a black teenager who had been swimming in Lake Michigan was killed by whites for coming too close to a whites-only beach. Rioting soon broke out, with white mobs invading black neighborhoods, torching homes and stores, attacking innocent residents. Led by war veterans, some of whom were armed, the blacks fought back, turning the border areas between white and black neighborhoods into battle zones. Fighting raged for 5 days, leaving 38 dead, 23 black, 15 white, and more than 500 injured. Race rioting in other cities pushed the death toll to 120 before the summer of 1919 ended. The riots made it clear to blacks that the North was not the promised land. The NAACP carried on its campaign for civil rights and racial equality, but many blacks no longer shared its belief that they would one day be accepted as first-class citizens. They turned instead to a compelling leader from Jamaica, Marcus Garvey, who gave a voice to their bitterness. Garvey called on blacks to give up their hopes for integration and to set about forging a separate black nation. He reminded blacks that they possessed a rich culture stretching back over the centuries that would enable them to achieve greatness as a nation. Garvey's grand vision was to build a black nation in Africa that would bring together all the world's people of African descent. In the short term, he wanted to help American and Caribbean blacks to achieve economic and cultural independence. Excuse me. His call for black separatism and self-sufficiency, which came to be called black nationalism, black separatism and self-sufficiency, elicited really a remarkable response among blacks in the U.S. In the early 1920s, his Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, enrolled millions of members in 700 branches in 38 states. His newspaper, Negro World, reached a circulation of 200,000. The New York chapter of the UNIA embarked on an ambitious economic development program, set up grocery stores, restaurants, and factories. Garvey's most visible economic venture was something called the Black Star Line, a shipping company with 3 ships that proudly flew the UNIA flag at their masts. This was sort of a take on the White Star Line, the very famous old shipping line that had launched the Titanic. This black nationalist movement did not endure for very long. Garvey entered into bitter disputes with other black leaders, including W.B. Du Bois, who regarded him as a flamboyant, self-serving demagogue. Garvey sometimes showed poor judgment, as when he expressed support for the KKK on the grounds that it shared his pessimism about the possibility for racial integration. Inexperienced in economic matters as well, he squandered a great deal of UNIA money on abortive business ventures. The U.S. government regarded his rhetoric as inflammatory and sought to silence him. In 1923, he was convicted of mail fraud involving the sale of Black Star stocks and was sentenced to 5 years in jail. In 1927, he was deported to Jamaica, and the Universal Negro Improvement Association folded. Nevertheless, his philosophy of black nationalism endured and will be resurrected in the future. One of the most striking things about the 1920s was the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan. The original KKK formed in the South in the late 1860s, you'll recall, but had died out with the defeat of Reconstruction and the reestablishment of white supremacy. The new Klan was created in 1915 by William Simmons, a white Southerner who had been inspired by D.W. Griffith's racist film Birth of a Nation, in which the early Klan was depicted as having saved the nation, and especially its white women, from predatory blacks. By the 1920s, control of the Klan had passed from Simmons to a Texas dentist, a guy named Hiram Evans, and its ideological focus had expanded from a loathing of blacks to a hatred of Jews and Catholics as well. It's sort of a pan-xenophobic sort of hate, not just at blacks. Evans' Klan propagated a nativist message the country should contain, or better yet, eliminate the influence of Jews and Catholics and restore Anglo-Saxon racial purity, Protestant supremacy, and traditional morality to national life. Now, Evans' message swelled Klan ranks and expanded its visibility and influence in the North and South alike. By 1924, as many as 4 million Americans are thought to have belonged to the Klan, including the half million members of its female auxiliary, women of the Ku Klux Klan. Not only was the Klan strong in states of the old Confederacy, such as Louisiana and Texas, and in border states like Oklahoma and Kansas, it thrived too in such northern states as Indiana, Pennsylvania, Washington, Oregon. It even drew significant membership from the cities of those states. Indiana, for example, was home to 500,000 Klansmen and women, many of them in the Indianapolis area. In 1924, Indiana voters elected a Klansman to the governor's office, and sent several other Klan members to the State House. In some respects, this new Klan functioned just as many other fraternal organizations did. It offered members friendship networks, social services, and fun. But while it was not a terrorist organization like the original Klan, it certainly did all it could to stir up hate. Let's talk about a positive development for African Americans in the 1920s. Paralleling the emergence of jazz music was a black literary and artistic awakening known as the Harlem Renaissance. Black novelists, poets, painters, sculptors, playwrights set about creating works rooted in their own culture instead of imitating the styles of white Europeans and white Americans. The movement had begun during the war, when blacks sensed that they might at last be advancing to full equality. It was symbolized by the image of the new Negro, this figure who would no longer be differential to whites, but who would display his or her independence through talent and determination. The new Negro would be assertive in every field. But the world of culture was the one place where blacks could really express their racial pride and demonstrate their talent. Langston Hughes, young black poet, said of the Harlem Renaissance, "We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it doesn't matter. We know we are beautiful, and ugly too." Writers Claude McKay, Jean Toomer, Zora Neale Hurston, poet County Cullen, painter Aaron Douglas were other prominent Renaissance participants. In 1925, Survey Graphic, a white liberal magazine, devoted an entire issue to Harlem, the Mecca of the New Negro. Alan Locke, an art and literary critic and professor of philosophy at Howard University in Washington, the Harvard, basically, of the historically black colleges, edited both the issue and the book, The New Negro, published later that year. Locke became sort of the movement's leading visionary and philosopher. But even these cultural advances failed to escape white prejudice. The most popular jazz nightclubs in Harlem, most of which were owned and operated by white people, refused to admit black customers. The only African Americans permitted inside were the jazz musicians, the singers, the dancers, prostitutes, and kitchen help. Moreover, the musicians had to play what the white patrons wanted to hear. Duke Ellington, for example, featured jungle music, quote unquote, which for whites revealed the true African soul, sensual, innocent, primitive. Obviously, this is vilest racism occurring here. Such pressures curtailed the artistic freedom of musicians and reinforced racist stereotypes of African Americans as inferior people who were closer to nature than the, quote, more civilized, unquote, white audiences who came to hear their music. So even here, we see in this good development, we see it still laden with prejudice.